Dear religious patriarchy, I resist you by reading feminist theology.
As a woman and as a person of visible minority and sexual minority and different various minorities and majorities, I resist oppression by mentioning these minorities, these characteristics very casually in conversation and pretending they're normal and default because that's always fun. And then people say, "You're what, girlfriend?" And I say, "Yeah, what's up?"
Dear sexism, I resist you by proudly calling myself a feminist and not being afraid to speak my mind.
I resist oppression one way by creating collaborative, community, inclusive, exciting, awesome-tastic art, like this mural here.
For me, the most important thing is reclaiming our voices, as especially for women, stereotypes and assumptions about what it means to be a woman is usually determined beyond our control, and I think to defy them publicly and to speak out in general is the most an individual can do, the most that I can do to resist oppression is just to say no to people trying to determine who I am and what I'm capable of.
Dear racism, colonialism, cissexism, ableism, ageism, religious oppression, sizeism, and classism. Even though I'm privileged enough to not have to resist you, I do anyway. Not because it makes me a good person, it doesn't, or because I get anything out of it, I don't, but because I care about justice. And to use the words of Lilla Watson, I know that my liberation is tied up with that of the people you oppress. So I resist you by working as humbly as I can in solidarity with all marginalized people, by working through my own privilege, by learning, listening, and reading about experiences I will never have, and by realizing that while we are all in this together, we're also in it differently. And that's life.
So especially by exercising forms of self-expression that aren't necessarily in everyone's everyday life, like making sure that I'm always doing art on the side and writing for myself, really affirming who I am. And not necessarily for anyone else to see, but it's always a constant reminder of who I am, and then I can go into the world and kind of portray myself in the best way possible.
The way I resist violence in my everyday life is I bring all my identities into every room that I walk into. So I refuse to allow the identities that I inhabit and that inhabit me to become competing or to be erased based off of someone else's interests. When I walk into a woman's space, I walk into it as a queer, racialized woman from a working class background. Every time. When I walk into a queer space, I walk into it as a queer, racialized woman from a working class background. For me, it's the only way to be vibrant and three-dimensional and to bring all of myself into every situation. For me, that's how I resist the violence of my body and my identities and my stories on a day-to-day basis.
Dear sizeism, I resist you by wearing clothes that fit my body and make me feel good, and eating food that makes me feel good, instead of trying to fit my body to some normal standard of beauty that most women don't fit.
Dear stigma of mental health issues, I resist you. Whether you're subtle or ingrained, or overt and in my face, I resist you. Through my art, through my research, by acknowledging you in everyday conversation. You may be out to get me, but you'd better watch your back. Because I'm starting to share my story. I'm challenging perspectives And I'm changing minds. And I'm not the only one.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Jack, and I resist gender stereotypes and therefore gender depression by being myself every day, which means having the courage to present myself, be myself, use the name I feel is appropriate for my gender, even though physically my gender doesn't match my being. I'm Lindsay Jack. I resist gender depression by being me.